Hello and welcome everyone to the SBL Waiting Room, your one-stop shop for all things Smite Pro League here in Season 8. Things have been on to a great start here in Phase number 3, and of course things are still spicing up. We're getting to the point where we're about halfway through just the round-robin stage of this first portion. Of course, then there's going to be a little bit of break in the group stages and then playoffs and a whole bunch of other stuff. I actually recommend going to SMITEProLeague.com and reading the blog that we actually just put out about the path to Worlds, and illustrates a lot for the SCC teams, but will also maybe enlighten some things for you regarding the SBL teams and what we can expect going forward. But that is where I actually want to zoom in a little bit, looking at some of these SBL teams, and specifically looking at teams like the Scarabs. And the Scarabs is the team that stands out to me because, and no surprise if you've looked at the predictions over the last couple of weeks, this has been a team that I've been actually pretty hot on. I've been voting for them. I think they have a lot of potential, something that they have said, plus that you've heard from more than just myself, and something that I expect to see a little bit more of. And they've done some really great things. They have pushed the teams like the Kings all the way to 3 games. But they're still winless, and that's the one that really is kind of tripping things up, as well as their last performance maybe not being exactly the most fire thing that we had seen. It kind of is, dwindling hope. But I am looking at their schedule at the very beginning, and then of course looking at the schedule towards the latter half of this round-robin portion. I think this is a team that we've seen a lot of and a lot of great from, with just the changes they've been able to make from Phase 2 to Phase 3, and despite the fact that they don't have the wins under their belt just yet, we have seen nothing but progress, and this is a team that I'm going to keep my eye on because I feel like they are, as of right now, one of the dark horses. You can expect them to come in, upset, really push some of these top teams to the limit, and if anything, they're at least going to make them go, let's say in a best-of-5 set to 5 games, as opposed to stumbling the way that we've seen in the past. So I have a lot of hopes for what we will see out of the Scarabs over the next few weeks. I really hope my voting reflects that. I can't remember who I voted for, but I do know that depending on the matchup, I am going to be leaning towards them, and that means things are going to be interesting because they play the Dragons tomorrow, and that is a matchup that if you remember way back when, it feels like ages ago, way back when in Phase 1, that was the biggest surprise of them all. They beat the Dragons then, they did it again in Phase 2. We'll see if they can continue that route in Phase 3. Of course, another thing that we need to look at, just from last week, we had a couple of win streaks that were going on this year. We've seen 2 teams now get to 8 wins in a row, at least in terms of sets. And then immediately, that for some reason, after 8, you have to go up against the Kings. I guess that's a rule? I don't know. I should check with Cooper on that one. But then you have to play the Kings. And apparently, obligatory, the Kings have to beat you 2-0 and make sure that nothing you can do is going to stand up to them. They end the Titans win streak this last week, and they look really good doing it. It is a team that, again, was pushed to 3 by the Scarabs, looked like they were having some struggles in the last few weeks as well, but ultimately get stopped, or find a stop to the Titans here and slow them down. We'll have to watch the Titans to see how they bounce back from this one, because the draft was a little weird. We'll talk about that a little bit later, though now we can look at some things that happened last week. Look at these graphics from Blues Ultra. Again, this is at Blues Ultra on Instagram, Twitter, and of course on Reddit. There I see them get posted all the time on the SMITEPro subreddit, as well as on their own Twitter and Instagram, where you can see recaps from the last week, as well as get the standings. So maybe you're coming in, you're like, man, I missed a couple of these sets. I wonder what happened. Oh, wow, the Warriors 2-0'd the Scarabs. What an insane showing. You see the Kings 2-0ing the Titans there as well. But I think the important part, and something, again, we'll touch on in just a little bit, is looking at that standings. Those top 5 teams, one of them's at 3-0, and then 4 of them are at 2-1. It is a very close competition for a lot of these teams, and it's so much so that the Warriors, even though being their only 1-2, could still potentially jump up into the top 4, just depending on how this week goes for them. It makes things very interesting. It also has the interesting player stats for the last week, where you're going to be able to see the top KDAs. Big Man Tings is kind of nuts, as it turns out. He got a sick quadra kill. That game should have been a loss for them. I'm just going to throw it out there. They should have lost, and Tings was able to get that. And of course, getting a 27.5 KDA makes him look good in the process. I'll throw this one out there, though, just for the sake of it. Paul, right now, is the current KDA leader overall, just because he, did really well 2 weeks in a row, as it turns out, despite all of that. But again, thanks to Blues Ultra. Make sure you go follow them and go ahead and look at that. But again, what we are looking at right now, we're getting to that halfway for the round robin, where in week 3, we'll have weeks 4, weeks 5, then everybody will have played everybody else. After that, it goes to a group stage. After that, it goes to playoffs. After that, we're talking about Worlds. We're looking at it. We're looking at teams. If you are looking in the SCC, you've got a path that is going to be up there, as well as if you are looking at the playoffs for the SBL, you are looking at potential chances to go straight to the semifinals if you are able to do as well as you want. We had all of that, but we also announced the high-res showcase, and we gave you the dates, the January 6th through 9th. 6th, that's my wife's birthday, so we'll see what happens there. I guess she's going to have to, we'll figure it out. We always do, as it always ends up happening. We got a quick little video for you so you can learn all you need to know about it. That's right, the best weekend in January when it comes down to the high-res showcase alongside the SMITE World Championship and all that fun stuff that goes on that weekend where we get to watch it. Of course, things, again, this last Worlds felt lonely. It's the only way I can describe it. I remember we finished the finals, and it kind of like turned around, and we're like, oh, we're just like in the studio. I've got JMac, I've got Aggro with me here. And we're gonna move on from maybe melancholy 2020 because 2020 that year is bad. We just don't talk about it, and instead we'll go ahead and talk about it. It says top 4, but we're throwing in the top 5 here just because, again, a lot of these teams are tied at 2-1 and are incredibly competitive with each other, especially after this most recent patch in 8.9, and the Leviathans are currently undefeated as of right now. So, and you know, Aggro, you didn't get to see as much. I watched the prediction podcast. I know you didn't see any of the games, and I also know that you went to the Reddit threads to
Unfortunately, I did.
that was a very fun time to watch that. You should go listen to that. That's a fun one. It's always fun to listen to you and Barra just go off the rails for a little while.
Yeah, we talk about as little SMITE as possible. But, we have to break down.
There is some SMITE in there.
Yeah, there's SMITE. It's SMITE related, I would
Yeah.
say.
But this is a team in the Leviathans, especially at 3-0, that I remember you talking about a little bit because we've seen them find more success this year than they found last year, especially in playoff events, Phase 2 playoffs, falling just shy of beating the Titans. And they've just been looking better and better every week they play together.
Yeah, this team, I just continue to be impressed by the way they want to play. And look, it's not like their 3-0 it has come from some of these teams that are struggling. They did play the Valks, which of course they've been struggling, but their other victories are over the Kings and the Dragons. Yeah. So those are two of the premier teams in this league. I just feel like the Titans, the Leviathans, they have that aura around them of a team that is playing the way that they want to play, that is really starting to mesh together well. It is doing it at the right time, right at the end of Phase 2, right at the beginning of Phase 3. And if they can continue on that path, I think they're going to be near the top of the standings, if not very first overall, and get themselves a great opportunity to make a run at the World Championship.
It's going to be fun to watch. I've been excited watching all of their sets, and I think they have a relatively loaded week, or, well, couple of weeks. Again, like you said, they've gotten some out. This week they're playing the Bolts. Next week it's the Warriors and the Titans, so not necessarily very easy matchups for them to try and take on. But the Bolts, at least last time, they were able to beat them. We'll have to see, because that is going to be in studio tomorrow, so make sure you keep your eyes on that one. But feels like a championship team. We'll see if anybody else is going to be able to slow that down. Yeah, 1 p.m. right there. You can see, wow, we're on point today. I feel like I'm on point today. This is awesome. And that means we can move forward to another team that did give the Leviathans a little bit of trouble, albeit they did still lose to them, and it was the Dragons, as you had just mentioned. Pushed them to 3 games in the land game that was right over there, and looked good doing it. And now things are really starting to look better for them. JMac, specifically with 8.9, it feels like the jungle has kind of been rekindled here for Sam.
Yeah, Sam gets to go back to his prime between the Susanos, the Hunbats, and even the Pele, even though it kind of struggled in success against the Leviathans, still looked fairly strong in game number 2. But, overall, this is a team that really does kind of pivot itself off their jungler. And if Sam for Soccer is able to pop off on his more traditional assassins that we've known him for on his world champion, status style of jungles like the Hunbat specifically and throwing the Susano there, this is a team that can be a force to be reckoned with. Even taking Leviathans to a game number 3, it was a close-knit battle in games 1 and 2.
Look, here's the way I look at it, Gore. The last clear-cut best jungler in the league was Sam. And then the meta kind of shifted away from jungle being a carry role. And no other jungler has done the things that Sam has done over the last 3 years.
Yeah.
I mean, Sam has been the undisputed best jungler of the last 3 years in my mind. You know, obviously adapting played last year and the year before that, and his overall career speaks for itself. No one's going to be able to contest that. But if you look at individual play, I think Sam has clearly been the best jungler when jungle is strong. And if jungle is going to be strong again, then the Dragons have to feel really good about their chances, because I think Sam will again be the clear best jungler in the league.
Yeah, it just feels like a whole revitalization for the team. Plus, I mean, right now, at least, Uller looks really good, and that's something that goes hand in hand with PandaCat. Like, having two distinct powerhouses, Mike already just existing on the team, fine, okay? Like, with the front line having been good this year, it feels like they just had nothing but just strength injected into them with this last update. So it makes things really interesting to look at the Dragons. We'll have to see, again, how they fare this weekend. They've had some interesting matchups, specifically versus the Scarabs in the past, and they're going to be taking that to the test, again, in studio tomorrow as well. We'll see how they're going to manage that one, or if maybe the Scarabs can come out and surprise us one more time. We do have to move to the next team. I believe we're going straight down the standings, who is currently third, although everyone's 2-1, so who really knows? It's the Olympus Bolts, and this is a team that I personally have been a big fan of at least all this year, but will say consistency, as of right now, Aggro, has been a little jumbled for them lately.
It's what's plagued this team this year and last year, right? This issue of consistency for them. And I think that with the meta switching up, they have a lot to prove in my mind, because, you know, I'm talking about Sam kind of regaining that throne in the jungle. Lasbra, in his most successful moments, usually likes to play the tank initiator jungles. That's what really fits his style. And if the meta's going to move away from that, the Bolts have got to show me that they're ready to adapt and that Lasbra is ready to step up and be a hard carry for this team, which I think he's grown so much this year that he certainly can fill that role, but just hasn't consistently in the past. So if it's going to be a jungle-centric meta, then Lasbra's going to have a lot of weight on his shoulders. And I think that he might be ready for it now, where he wasn't last year or the year before that. But I'm excited to see what he's going to be able to bring for the Bolts, because this team, obviously, the sky is the limit for them.
Yeah, it makes things a little more interesting when, again, a team that, especially now that the Titans have fallen as well, these teams that have gone on some ridiculous win streaks and had some widely successful runs so far this year, struggling a little bit in Phase 3. It's going to keep things interesting and make sure that every single matchup from now on, at least for theirs, something to keep their eyes on. They're going to be taking on the Kings later today, and then tomorrow, of course, they're going to be in studio to play up against the Leviathans. So again, a lot of stuff that I think is on the horizon, and not an easy week for the Bolts to try and bounce back.
No.
But we'll see if they're going to be capable of doing so. The Kings is actually the other team that we want to talk about here, and that makes it much, much easier. This is a team that has now ended 2 win streaks, JMac.
Yeah.
They unfortunately fell pretty hard in the Phase 2 playoffs, but have had really, really widely successful sets, sometimes other. It feels, again, a little bit of consistency issues, but at the same time, they play and leave almost everything on the field.
Yeah, I mean, when the Kings are hot, they are hot, especially when you throw big man Tings on a god like TM. I mean, he got the quadra kill to kind of end the weekend off in that second game. And I think you point out best, it's a game that the Titans probably should have at least won that game and pushed us to 3, but the Kings' patience in the late game was able to win out for them. And I mean, when these guys are on their game, they look unstoppable. But when they're having even that little bit of struggle, when some of that mental game just starts to kind of fall apart for them, I mean, I'm not going to say they look like a bottom team, but they definitely do not look like the top 5 team that we're used to. I mean, these are guys who stopped the Bolts winning streak when they were 8-0. Now they stopped the Titans 8-0 winning streak. If these guys can just get comfortable, and specifically Captain Twig, if he can kind of get back in the swing with these assassins, I mean, he showed us that he's good with the assassins. No matter how much he wants to try and tell us, nah, man, I'm not really that good on assassins. No matter how much his team kind of pats against that one, once he gets his stride with these assassins, he is going to be up there for the top junglers.
He has been phenomenal, and despite last week, I think he even came up after his interview where he's just like, "Yeah, I got carried that set." Like that is just the blanket statement he gave us in the post-game interview, and it was because Big Man Tings had such a stellar performance. Again, a relatively slow start to him, but he was trying things, and not only trying things, but playing gods that. Even when I think assassins, I didn't relate to Twig. I think Twig assassins, the first thing that comes to my mind is Hunbats, of all things. But he's playing the Susanoo, he played the Loki. He was definitely leaning out there. I'm excited to see what they have in store for us a little bit later at 3 p.m. today when they take on the Bolts. Because, again, that jungle matchup might be the most important one of them all. Twig, who's been suffering a little bit, Lasbury's been suffering a little bit, and both of them taking on a much bigger role in this team and in this meta that is going to be shifting forward for them. And, of course, they were able to beat the Titans Titans this last Sunday and end their streak. We had mentioned that a few times, but they did it in a very stellar fashion, which was not just, hey, we beat them. It was, we beat them 2-0, and Tings got a quadra kill. So we have to look towards the Titans, because one of those games, and Aggro, I know you weren't here, so I'm going to get your opinions on this one. It was a very brilliant top 3 draft. I can't remember exactly what it was. I could probably pull it up. But I remember the bottom 2 picks that the Titans locked in were a Ganesh and a Set. And it was one of those things where it was like, and it was Set carry, by the way. It was not going to the jungle. I was Cyclone Spin through and through. And it was one of those like, okay, like you can, let's see what you have. Did not perform very well, as it turns out.
Sure.
And do you think this is something like, I mean, we have it written here as like maybe a lack of a coach, or is it just playing around with the meta? What is it that comes into this?
I personally am not of the opinion that you need a coach to be a top team. I think that coaches almost always help and almost always will be a positive thing to your team. But team environment is really important. And in moments where you don't have someone who fits with your team environment, who brings the type of attitude that you want out of your coach, then it can be a detriment. So I personally don't have a problem with the Titans not having a coach. I don't think it's going to hold them back. In no world is it going to be, oh, they would have won Worlds if they had a coach. Like that's never going to be the case. I do think that this team is one that's willing to experiment. And sometimes experiments go wrong.
Yep.
And that is okay by my estimation. Now, I'm kind of done with the Ganesh. I'm sorry, Dave. He's not here, so he can't be mad at me. I'm kind of done with Ganesh for a little bit. I don't think he fits with what you need your support to be doing in this meta. I think the Titans are going to be fine.
Yeah.
You look at the way that this team is constructed. I'm talking about Sam and how big of a difference he's going to make now for the Dragons in the jungle now that his role is expanded. I think Layers and how well he fits into this team is going to be a huge sticking point for this squad. If he can find a way to still allow his backline to shine, because I'm of the opinion that you can't have too many ball handlers on a team. You can't be trying to hard carry out of mid, jungle, and solo and ADC all the time. You kind of need to facilitate a game plan and identify your win conditions and who's our primary win condition. If you've got Paul and Cyclone on your team and Benji, no matter how talented you are, those should be your win conditions, because those are 3 of the all-time greats in their roles. Layers is a great player, and on most teams in this league, I think I'd be talking about him as, hey, jungle's big again, jungle can be your hard carry, Layers is going to pop off. But I think that's the last thing the Titans need. Just let Paul, Cyclone, Benji win you your games. Those should be your win conditions. And I'm interested to see how well he's going to be able to adjust his play style to try and fit that.
It's kind of insane to think about. Like that is really where the Titans are. Like, and this was a big conversation I know we had with a couple of the players and things like that when they picked up Layers was, okay, they're doing great while they're winning. What happens when they start to lose? If they lose too many sets in a row, how do they bounce back from it? And that's kind of something that I think is still to look forward to, how these players handle that. But when you've got what feels like 5 individual win conditions across your team, it seems like it's pretty good, especially because I think in a lot of that set we had the Ganesh come through, and maybe it's something that needs to be left behind, but I think there were like 8 support bans or something. Like, it felt ridiculous that you had to lean that far down. So it's still a very big team to keep your eyes on, and of course watch their games throughout this week and throughout the rest of the phase to see how they're going to be able to bounce back. But now we can move forward to Fact Gaming, of which I had to augment one of these questions 3 times because I can't read, as it turns out. Mainly because I saw something, I was like, haha, there's a stat, I'm going to put it as a question. And then this morning it was like, hey, that's like wrong. And I'm like,
oh, we don't like that.
And so I updated it, and then it was like, hey, that's also still kind of wrong. So now there's just 3 answers for that question, as it turns out. But that's a little bit later.
Some chances.
The first one is, well, a little bit easier for you because it's only 2 gods that you have to choose between. Who had the better win rate last week? Was it Tiamat or Raijin?
I feel like I'm being targeted with this question.
Yeah, you didn't. You weren't here.
You know, I wasn't here.
I kind of want to just say Tiamat here.
Raijin. I just have to take the opposite.
Yeah,
That's
so that way somebody's going to be right. Well, it is Raijin.
Let's
He's got
go.
a 67%. I think his.
Dang.
I've got the numbers in front of me. So
to be fair, how many games did Tiamat actually even get?
She got a 5, I think.
She did get 5. I'm surprised she got through 5 times.
Oh, wait, I'm lying to you. She got played 9 games last week.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
Both of them got played 9 games. That's why I chose them. Raijin won 6, Tiamat won 5. And so Raijin doing a little bit better. Yeah, but hey, 1 off.
Easy dub.
Reflects more in percentages when it's those low numbers. 5 out of 9 and 6
That's
out of 9
fair.
are 2 distinctly different numbers. So now the next question. Did Uller have more games played last week or the rest of the year combined?
Oh. That's a good question. So I know that I looked at some picks and bans, and I did see a lot of Uller, and I guess I just have to think about how much Uller we saw before last week.
I think really Phase 1 is the bigger question, because Phase 2, he was only played like maybe 2 or 3 times that I can think of. And I think it was like Emilitu almost exclusively.
In Phase 1, Transcendence was good, but I think it was still a Devo's meta.
But it was like Chiron and Donza at that time.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to go last week.
You're going to go last week?
I'll pull the opposite and say the rest of the year.
Yeah. It's unfortunately the rest of the year. I was really hoping it was going to be last week. He played 7 games last week, 11 games everywhere else, not including that. So he's got 18 games total. And that was kind of like, I saw that. I was like, we haven't seen a whole lot of Uller this year.
Definitely not.
Impressive to see how his one resurgence comes through. A couple of item buffs, and all of a sudden he's right back in it, to the point where he was first pick as of last week. Now, here's the question I had to augment a few times. We'll see.
Okay, here we go.
We'll see what it says. What god had a 100% win rate last week? I added minimum 3 games. And I will reveal to you there are 3 different answers for this.
Okay.
The one that caught my eye was really cool to me.
So I'm trying to think of gods that made it through. Artie only made it through twice, and she lost both games, but she's still 100% pick ban. Geb won both games for the Dragons in their set against the Bolts, and I know he got banned multiple times after, but I want to say he still made it through at least 1 or 2 more times. I'm going to say Geb probably.
You going to say Geb?
I'm going to go with a god that isn't good.
Okay.
That's usually how it happens, right? Like, a god gets let through 3 times, a good team plays a god 3 times that no one else is really playing. That being said, I didn't get a chance to watch last week. So I'm literally throwing a dart at 114 options.
16?
Yeah, 115 options.
Well, I guess with no Charybdis.
Right,
and
no
Charybdis.
Right.
No. Kleena?
Kleena,
There we
yeah.
go.
Kleena, yeah.
Kleenex.
I'm going to go with... I'm going to guess it was... I got nothing. I'm totally blank. I'm going to go Chiron.
You're going to go Chiron? I wish it had been Chiron.
Can I get a second guess after we get if mine was right or not?
Geb was right. Geb
cool.
Geb was the most games played that also got it. That was able to find a big one. So that was a really big one. Yeah, and there Nike did it well as well. That's a Susanoo, but I'm pretty sure Izanami was the one. Susanoo.
I was going to guess Sylvanas, but then I'm thinking about it, I think the Scarabs may have lost 1 game with
Oh, Susanoo did have a 100% win rate, though. But he only had 2 games, though. See? And that's where I learned that I needed to read a little bit better, because there were a lot of gods that had, like, 1 win. Like, I said which god had a 100% win rate, and there were 15, and I went...
That's too many.
Whoops.
That's a lot of gods.
I said Geb. All right, and then the bonus fact, of course, I don't know what this question is, so we'll have to see. Of the top 6 players with the most assists, 3 belong to one team. Which team is it?
Well, it would just be the team with the most kills, right? Like, that is the only way that it would make any sense.
Yeah.
And Leviathans are winning the most, so I'm going to go with the Leviathans.
I'm trying to, you know what? As much as I want to say, like, because, like, Mike and Aurora are putting up numbers in there.
Let's say, like, they're putting up some big ones.
I used to know who had the most assists in the league, and I don't know that off the top of my head
well,
anymore.
I
want to
bring up the Blues Ultra graphic, because it had the bloody, the most killed game, and we could use that.
I'm going to refrain from cheating, because I know I have a thing in front of me that could find it, so I'm going to stop. I don't know. I like Leviathans. I'm going to go with the Titans, though, because I think Aurora, Benji...
Yeah, those are good. I'm going to go the Dragons in my guess.
Yeah, I think Dragons.
Dragons is actually a really good one. Yep.
Leviathans.
It was Leviathans.
Nice call.
Wrong you in first, Panatom in 5th, and then Yarkor in 6th. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
652 assists.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of assists. That's a lot of kills across the board.
That is,
because you got to think, that's just the ones that he's been there to help out. That doesn't include everything else, like the mid 2v2s.
Well, so this is the full year?
Is it?
Oh, I guess that's this year, yeah.
Yeah, I got to imagine it's year. Yeah.
Okay, so...
About to say, if he got 652 in just phase 3, that'd be insane.
That's
even still across
impossible.
Even still across the entire year, though, you got to think, and this is, again, only assist that Wrong You has been there for. This doesn't include what the mid and jungler have been doing. You can see Panton with 476. I mean, this makes a lot of sense, honestly.
Well, it also makes sense because Yarkor, like, solo laners normally wouldn't be anywhere near the top of this list, but because Yarkor played ADC for 2 phases, he gets extra assists that way.
Now, I'm also wondering what this is if you extend it, because that's season 8. I wonder what it is if you go, like, all time. That's why I went with Titans, because I was like, damn, all time. Like, Benji and Aurora have been kind of nuts.
All
Same
time,
for the Dragons.
You can throw PBM in there for probably all time. So.
Oh well, it is the Leviathans for this season, and that's all that matters for us going into what is going to be week 3. Woo. As we move into it. Again, tomorrow is a big in-studio day. Let's take a look at the standings. If you've been watching the show, you should know who the top 5 are. It's the Leviathans, Dragons, Kings, Titans, Bolts in, well, I guess that order according to our standings. Of course, now tied, and plus minus is where those numbers are coming from. If you're wondering why are the Dragons 2nd, Kings 3rd, Titans and Bolts tied for 4th. It's the map wins overall in each of their sets, not just being 2-1, but how many games they've had to play and how well they have won those sets. Of course, then the Warriors, the Scarabs, and the Valkyries. Scarabs and Valkyries still looking for their first wins this week, and that is where things get maybe a little more iffy for them. We can look at this week's schedule and go ahead and see who they have to play. The Valkyries do not have an easy week. They get to play up against the Titans, and they will be playing up against the Scarabs. Now, it is worth mentioning, the last win the Valkyries got was versus the Scarabs in Phase 2, week number 4. And so maybe this is their chance to clap back. Of course, one of the more recent wins for the Scarabs was also against the Valkyries in Phase 2, week number 8. So that is a match to keep your eye on Sunday for both of those teams. No matter what, somebody's got to have a win at that point after that set. But the Scarabs will have to make it through the Dragons. The Valkyries will have to make it through the Titans. We'll be watching the Bolts in a pseudo doubleheader once later today, one tomorrow to start things off. And then the Warriors are going to be able to close out this week 3. So a lot of interesting things that are on the horizon. I need to bring up my rundown for this so I can remember where I'm going with this. But the big thing is that tomorrow is going to be in studio. And this is where things get a little more interesting. We're looking at specifically the supports here, the Bolts and the Leviathans. JMac, we just learned that admittedly Wrong U has the most assists this year. Or, well, at least I would assume so because 652 is nuts. Yeah. And him and Jake are going to have a really big matchup tomorrow.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's going to come down to kind of the pick and ban phase for them. I mean, we've talked a lot about the god pools that both these players have, but it's become a little bit smaller in more recent weeks. But it's also become very similar between them. I mean, gods like Horus, who have also just gotten a buff, or gods that both these players do like to go towards. The Serket has been a pick that both these players really love going towards, and even their junglers like going there. I think a lot of this is going to come down to picks and bans. Obviously, the execution on the battleground is where the majority of that comes from. But picks and bans are sure to be highly contested between these two supports specifically. We've been seeing a lot of targeted bans towards both of them throughout the entirety of Season 8, and I don't imagine that's going to change anytime soon.
And I'm just really excited to watch these. I think both of these supports have had phenomenal years. I mean, admittedly, what you had said, Aggro, kind of sticks even more true to that matchup. Later today, we'll get a glimpse at Lasbert and see what he's going to bring, but we'll also have to see how that matches up with Panatom, because Panatom has quite a few gods that seem to be slipping right back into the meta, and that is where I think that fusion on the other side, looking specifically at Wrong U, he's been widely successful. Like, we got a Horus buff, which feels like it's something that Wrong U's going to be able to run. A lot of good supports that are open for him, and it's nothing but net benefits now.
Yeah, Wrong U has become a true win condition for this Leviathans team. And whenever your support brings that, it becomes very difficult to play against your squad, because it's not just this Yamoja, it's their Serket, like you mentioned, JMac. I think that I'm going to be curious to see if Wrong U is willing to pull out things like Geb in like Khepri, as those gods continue to rise up a little bit in prioritization, especially with Geb being better. What types of picks are going to be good against him? I think Khepri's one of the better matchups up against that Geb. Serket doesn't match up particularly well there. Horus doesn't match up particularly well there. Some of the gods that you would anticipate that Wrong U is going to be playing. So how well can he adjust to what is going to be the new support meta? I'm a huge Wrong U believer. I think that he's maybe the best support we have in the league right now.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see what he's going to be able to do, but the god pools of PBM and Aurora and these guys who have been around for a long time, Jake and Wrong U have got to prove that they can now expand the pool a little bit and try and adapt to what the new meta is going to be.
Yeah, the support's going to be essential for that one from what we've seen in the past from these two teams, and make it a lot more interesting. Again, 1 p.m. tomorrow, watching the Bolts take on the Leviathans. It'll be in studio, and so that extra LAN flair is going to come up. Although I think these two teams have played the most against each other at LAN at this point, save for Barra, who had to go to the wedding that one time and didn't show up to the studio. For good reason, though. But now we can move and look at the second LAN matchup that we're going to be having on Saturday. The Dragons taking on the Scarabs. This is going to sound very melancholy, but this is a matchup that has a very special place, because the last cast I had with Finch was watching the Scarabs take down the Dragons. Like, that is burned in my memory forever, and that is something that I think on Saturday, Aggro, is going to be able to give us at least something fun. I expect a lot out of the Scarabs here.
Yeah, I mean, the Scarabs, 0-3. They have been playing better Smite. You know, they took the Kings to 3 games, and then they took the Titans to 3 games, if my memory serves. But eventually, you got to find a win. You know, especially in this round robin format where you're only playing each team once. You know, if they really feel like they're a top 4, top 5 team, like we've been hearing, you lose to one top 5 team, you lost to another, you lose to another. All of a sudden, you're kind of out of options. You know, and you've got and you've already lost to the Oni Warriors, which is not indicative of a top 5 team.
Yeah.
So the Scarabs have got to put their money where their mouth is sooner rather than later, because frankly, they're running out of time to beat a really good team.
And this is one of those things when you look at the standings. This one's way more important for the Dragons right now because they have a lot more potential to jump into that top 2 easily versus the Scarabs, who are relying on other teams losing a lot, and the Dragons and having to beat this one. Plus, they have to find a bunch of wins. JMac, it's not an easy route for the Scarabs to try and find that top 2. Although I still think feasible, just not the easiest road for them, especially when you're banking on the Leviathans dying. We'll go ahead and look at the predictions. There we go. I lost the word there, and see where everyone was voting. Aggro, you're the only one that's out here. And honestly, this was one that I think was a coin flip for me, but you went for the Bolts over the Kings. Everybody else agrees. Titans over Valks. They agree. Leviathans over Bolts. Dragons over Scarabs. Scarabs over Valks. And Kings over, what was that? No, not Valks. Warriors a little bit later. So where are the Bolts at?
Yeah, I just think that the Kings, I mean, it's a bad argument against my vote, but it's that they typically play to the level of their competition. You know, the Kings are playing a team lower in the standings. They typically play a little bit worse. A team that's on a hot streak, they step up and play really well. But I don't know. There's just something there with that team that both these teams are so inconsistent that it's a coin flip for both. Like, if they're both playing really well, then it's going to be a really exciting match. If one team is playing well and the other isn't, it's probably going to be a pretty quick 2-0.
I'm going to have to start making, now that we got the percentages back, I'm going to have to start making some wild guesses here in the next couple of weeks. I want to go up. I'm at 83. What was that? You were at 89 with Hindu and Dave?
I'm going to be honest.
Why are all our ones at 89?
He's got the smaller sample size.
I do.
So he's got the smallest sample size, so I don't count this.
Now, granted here, I also had probably the worst guess percentage last week. Now, one of them namely because I misclicked and I put the Valkyries over the Bolts.
That's right.
But the first 4 sets of the week, I got wrong 3 of those 4, so I'm actually really surprised my 89% is up there.
I think a lot of us got those wrong. last week was a little wild. All right, well, that's going to do it here for the SPL waiting room. The SPL is coming up right now, so make sure you go ahead, grab any drink, snacks, whatever you need to get set up for this first set. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we're back, it'll be the SPL.